Yeah.
Oh, okay, what is the past test on?
The past is on cause and effect. In other words, if this is the cause, what will the effect be? And I'm tempted to say a little more about it, but basically, to me, it's just common sense stuff. That if the climate warms up, I mean, I've talked about this, but what effect does it have on plant life? If the climate cools down, what effect does it have on life in general? And I've been harping on this throughout the semester. But, I mean, that's part of it right there. And those of you who are in here heard that. Okay. The ones who aren't in here, they should have been. It's the past time to start the class. All right. Yeah. Okay. But it's basically it's common sense stuff. Cause and effect. As best as I understand the cause and effect, that is. All right. This morning's class, to be an 8:30 class, I had some 18 pupils who showed up, and they were the most attentive I've ever seen as far as being in an 8:30 class. The topic is the most relevant topic probably we can talk about in the modern world. Now, 50 years ago, a lot of students were falling asleep on a boring lecture on Islam. Today, everybody tends to stay awake. Yes, today we're talking about Islam, chapter 7. Now, I'm very much aware, I never asked any student his or her religious beliefs. Some students will come right out and say what they are, what they believe. But I'm very much aware that there might be some Islamic students in this class, and I want you to know you are welcome. Your input is welcome. Your comments are welcome here. And I don't want you to feel like you're left out or being, like I'm creating a bad learning environment for you. I'll say this about Islamic women, generally, when they come to my class, and other teachers know the same thing, they generally do quite well in classes like this. Maybe because they have fewer distractions than, say, American women have, but Islamic men oftentimes do not tend to do that well. Islamic women often make A's and B's. Again, maybe I don't know what the reason is, but possibly it's just plain lack of distractions. I want to start off by saying that some of the most honest, morally upright people I've ever met have been Islamic. I had a case a few years back where I'd put down on a student on college, he made an 80s on a test. He told me, he said, Mr. Cummings, you have 80 on my college. I actually made it a 60 to show me a scandal. Step out here in the hall. He said, because of your honesty, I'm going to give you the 20 points. He needed them anyway, but I'm going to give you the 20 points because of your honesty. I said, won't upset anybody, Kurt. Just don't tell anybody about this, but you were honest about it. I told I would never have caught it because once I filed the grades, the papers away, I never looked at them again. So I never caught it, but you told me about it. Well, he wound up with a C for the course. I mean, he was that academically talented. But again, most honest people I've met have been Islamic. Having said that, there's something else that a lot of students, I mean, I've run into this in my classes, seem to have what I'm going to call it a misconception of. Which is the worst thing you can do to a person? Now, all right. My daughter became interested in Harry Potter, and the Harry Potter books, a man named Dumbledore said that some things you can do to a man that's worse than death, or do to her worse than death. My daughter, what's worse than death? Well, which is worse? Taking a man's freedom away, or a woman's freedom away, or killing him? You're speaking like a true American. You're American. If you are American, your American ancestors will be proud of you. The problem, here's the issue. Is the problem just a few extremists, or is the problem Islam itself? Folk, I have to take the point of view that the real problem is not the few extremists, not the people who strap bombs themselves and blow themselves up in a public place, or disrupt weddings or blowing themselves up. That's mild, really, compared to the real issue. The real issue is enslavement. the feeling that everybody must believe as I do, or I'm going to go around and destroy them. That's the issue. The problem is Islam itself, not the extremists. Islam has spent 1,000 years and have not invented anything in the last 1,000 years. If the Wright brothers had grown up in an Islamic country, someone in a free country would have invented the airplane. They would not have. If Thomas Edison had grown up Islamic, somebody in a free country would have invented the light bulb.
Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. He was a bastard who stole everything.
What's that?
Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. He was a bastard who stole everything and got some credit somehow.
All right, you can see. I mean, hey, I'll tell you something about the light bulb. When the time came, a lot of people came up with the idea all at once.
Yes.
Same with telephone. 70 men invented the telephone at one time, but the courts upheld Bell because he had a piece of paper that proved that he had made a call before anybody else could prove it. It's actually 70. The automobile, nobody knows who invented it. It's just when the technology was right, a whole bunch of automobiles started appearing out of people's barns and sheds overnight, and nobody knows who made the first one. So with the light bulb, your book now, the authors say that Joseph Swan in Europe invented it also, along with Edison. Be that as it may, when the time is right and the technology is right, a whole bunch of people appear up with the inventions at once. But weirdly enough, they never come from this part of the world, folks. They might come from here or here, even here, but never from this part of the world. All right. That's the backdrop. That's the background. Now, having said that, we'll get started. Islam started in Arabia. Now, I know it's on the maps here, it shows Saudi Arabia. Arabia is the only country in the world that's named after its ruling family. The word Saudi did not appear on the maps until the 20th century. Throughout all of history, it was just simply known as Arabia. It's mentioned by Herodotus as Arabia. The Bible mentions it even before, long before Herodotus. The Romans conquered it. For many years, all we know about its earlier history is what outsiders who visited wrote about. Because if they had any of their own written records, their records might have been written on paper and been destroyed along the way. The records have not come down to us. What we know about them was they were Bedouins. That is, they were roving tribal peoples. And the geography makes history. The geography of Arabia is very, very desert-like with a bunch of water holes called oases. And around these oases will tend to spring up cities. At first they start off with villages. But the people would move around from one grassland to another, wherever they could find grass for their flocks, wherever they could find water. And they'd stay there till the water dried up, then they'd move on to another place. Now, in the city of Mecca, there was a big stone that the Meccans say fell down from heaven. Even though we're not allowed to examine it, most scientists today believe it was probably a meteorite. This stone was at the Kaaba, called the Kaaba.
Kaaba is where the stone's located.
Yeah, and the Kaaba is a big square. The stone is located in the center, and it's surrounded by a huge square where thousands of people can gather. Now, it used to be, around this stone were 360 idols. A different statue for every day of the year, and you might say, I know that there's 365 days, but they celebrated 360. They had a 360-day calendar with leap months every once in a while. Anyway, there were 360 idols, one for each day of the year. And the leaders of the tribes, the type of geography they had led to tribal peoples to where they did not form together as a nation very easily, but they formed individual tribes, and no one seemed strong enough to conquer all of them. but the tribal leaders were called sheik. Now, if I've misspelled that word differently from the way the book does, my apologies. The spelling of a lot of Arabic words.
Just put an H on here.
Asheikh. Thank you. Actually, your book italicizes that word. These were chiefs, like tribes of chiefs of tribes. Anyway, now into this backdrop, a young man was born named Muhammad. Now, folk, when I was younger, we spelled that name here with an O here and an E here. These spellings have changed. The word Quran, the spelling of it has changed also. But anyway, Muhammad was orphaned at the age of 6. Father and mother both dead. He was reared up then by an uncle. He grew up in poverty. Now, on a very personal note, I grew up in poverty. And one of the things that poor people talk about is how crummy a person the rich people are. Wealth is looked on as being sheer anathema, as being somehow ungodly and wicked, and the wealthy people are looked on as being snakes and whatever else. Well, when Muhammad grew up, he married a widow woman who was quite wealthy. And he all of a sudden found himself wealthy. And then he found himself as a wealthy man doing the same things that he had promised himself he would never do. And it created a lot of conflict because here he was, it's like he was trapped into wealth, forced into it. Part of it was his society was becoming wealthy also due to the fact that the Silk Road, the Silk Road started in China and took various routes to the Mediterranean. But because of the political winds, it found a way to take a route through Arabia. And of course, I've mentioned how the Silk Road, the merchants there never traveled from China to the Mediterranean or vice versa. They'd travel maybe 100 or so miles and sell the merchandise to other merchants who would travel a few hundred miles. Well, the Arabs would buy their merchandise and then travel a few miles and sell the merchandise to the next merchant at a profit. But then they make a profit because goods going from Europe to China would pass through Arabia, and the Arabs make a profit going both ways. So some of the Arabs at least got to be wealthy. We have the same thing going on in our country. Interstate 75, where with the towns it goes through, they become rich and thriving. The towns it bypasses remain little towns. In particular, I used to teach near Calhoun and Fairmount. Most of you never heard of Fairmount, I guess, but they once were the same size of town. The interstate went through Calhoun. Fairmount is still a small little country town in the middle of nowhere. And Calhoun's a thriving metropolis. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Nobody's heard of these places? All right. Calhoun's only about 60 miles north of us. If you go north, you'll run into it. Anyway, just a little, it used to be a little town. But anyway, became a Muhammad found himself torn by conflict. And also, and a lot of us run into this, though, maybe every young person. You're brought up in your parents' home and your parents teach you a certain set of values. Then one day you have to face the world, get in the world and find out other people have different values than you, or the values of your society seem to conflict with what your parents have taught you. And Muhammad went through a real spiritual battle. So he'd go alone out in the desert, climb a hill on the top of a hill on the desert to pray and meditate. And while there, according to his own life story, he was met by the Archangel Gabriel and given a message. He went and talked to a Christian priest. The Christian priest laughed at him. He talked to a Jewish rabbi. The rabbi also laughed at him. And it seemed like he was getting nowhere. He finally tried to convert the people of Mecca. The Meccans rejected him, so he fled from Mecca in a flight that is known as the Hejira. And again, I have to look up these spellings because they have changed. Hejira, the Hijra. your book gives two different pronunciations of it, Hujara or Hejara. Now, this is very important to Islam because they count time from this point. From the day he fled Mecca, he went to the city of Medina. And there, I mean, there's a case of many prophets. His message was accepted by the people of Medina, whereas they'd been rejected by Meccans. Once he had firmly established his religion in the city of Medina, he went back to Mecca and conquered and forced the people to convert to his religion at sword point. This was the beginning of the practice of fire and sword. When he forced conversion, then, because he didn't like idolatry, he destroyed the 360 idols that were surrounding the Kaaba. Nevertheless, he left the stone there, and to this day, Muslim people try to go there at least once in a lifetime to pray, or to make a pilgrimage to the holy place. Well, having converted the Meccans, he began to spread his religion throughout Arabia. And to make a long story short, he conquered all of Arabia. And shortly after he conquered Arabia, before his religion had time to spread outside of Arabia, he died. Now, about his personal life, he remained monogamous as long as his first wife lived, the wife who was a wealthy merchant and who introduced him to wealth. As long as she lived, he remained faithful to her. When she died, he married several women. And one of the stories is that he married a 9-year-old girl. Now, before you start calling him a pedophile, you have to understand, folks, this was a common practice at the time. It was common throughout the known world. In India, they did this very often. Marry 8 and 9-year-olds. In Europe, even, this was going on occasion. There was a story of a European nobleman who, he was only 7 years old, but his parents had died and some woman wanted the estate, so she got the church to agree to have him marry. They caught him in his playground and performed the wedding ceremony. He said, please, can I go back to play? And so he went back to playing, but nevertheless, the marriage remained intact because the wife got a big share of the estate, I mean, after all being his wife. And he had, even at 7 years old, a title of nobility, which she was able to share. I mean, this went on, folks, in the ancient world a lot. Now, Arabs will try to say that, oh, this marriage was not consummated when he was 16, but more research has been done on this subject, and others say, no, it looks like that he actually forced himself on the young girl, even at 9. And when she died, he died a few months afterward, presumably of a broken heart. All right. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that he believed, but the book was written called the Quran. All right, the Quran. In my day, we spelled it K-O-R-A-N. Now it's spelled Q-U-R-A-N. Again, as we learn more about these people, they insist that we start spelling things a different way. Anyway, now there is some controversy. Your book mentions it's about the Quran. According to, now every Islamic person you meet will tell you that the Quran was written by Muhammad, and once written down, it was never changed from the moment it was written to this day. Western scholars, though, who are not committed to Islam, will say, no, the Quran was actually written after Muhammad died, and when he died, a bunch of people got together and they could not agree on his sayings, but they kept hashing it out, and finally, one group put the other groups to silence and said that our version of the Quran is final, and the Quran has not been changed since that book was written. Again, now I had an Islamic girl about 15 months ago who insisted, no, the Quran was written by Muhammad, it hasn't been changed from the beginning. You can believe what you want to, folk, but Western scholars have tended to question what they say about it, that Muhammad actually, he spoke the Quran, but he might not have actually written it. All right. Muhammad are his teachings. Among the things he taught were 5 pillars of Islam, where the Islamic people were expected to have standard prayer times, pray 5 times a day, facing Mecca. In other words, if you could view the world from space and look down, you'd see a circle of Islamic people circled around the city of Mecca from wherever they're located. I mean, if they're located east of Mecca, they'll turn to the west. If they're located west of Mecca, they'll pray toward the east. So they pray toward Mecca 5 times a day. They also try to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in their lifetime. They observe a holy month of Ramadan, and you hear a lot about Ramadan in the news lately. They believe in giving alms, helping the poor and unfortunate. But they also have a law called Sharia law, which, again, these terms, Sharia, Ramadan, well, I never heard when I was in school, but they're making it. But Sharia law calls for, among other things, that women should be completely covered up. And in some cases, even their faces, not even their face shown. The women should never go outside the house without either their father or their brother with them, or without being accompanied by men. And women who commit adultery are to be stoned to death. Men are not. I mean, men are allowed to. Women are not. Men can have up to 4 wives. Women can only have 1 husband. They have prohibitions against drinking, gambling, eating pork, games of chance. And, oh yes, especially anyone who converts from Islam must be killed. Now, folks, this is standard Islamic theology. It's not just the views of a few extremists, which you might be led to believe, but this is standard Islamic theology. Now, completely lacking in Islamic theology is any assurance of a happy life, except you have one way to guarantee a happy life. Those who follow will take you into paradise. One way, and that's to die in a holy war, which explains why their young people are often not hesitant to blow themselves up over square. They believe that this is very pleasing to Allah, and it's the only way they have to guarantee that they will go into paradise when they die. In fact, it was Muhammad is quoted one time as saying, "I wonder if Allah will have me." They have no assurance of what we might call salvation, and Islam has no provision for forgiveness. Now, I had a student from Islam call my hand on that one and said, well, they believe if you stop your sinning, you will be forgiven, but they don't say how much sinning you have to stop, or what if you have committed sin all your life, you never stop. In fact, it's difficult to see how a person can function without any provision for forgiveness. And, one theologian said if we live long enough, we'll wind up committing 60,000 sins in a lifetime. That's about an average of 2 or 3 a day. And most of us may wind up committing more than that. So, and we never get to where we are completely free of. But they imagine somehow that they're free from sin if they keep certain rules. And so, anyway, this is part of Sharia law, which is making a lot of news now. Now, they had a lot of zeal, and this is something that we in the West have a hard time understanding. In the West, there's a lot of indifference toward matters of religion. It's said that Europeans, only about 1% of Europeans attend church on Sunday, 2% ever attend regularly. The average European might go to church 3 times, once to be baptized as an infant, another time to get married, then the 3rd time is when he goes as a corpse when he's dead. Very indifferent to matters of religion. And the United States is not that much better off. Most of us are no longer extremely religious, very nominally religious. Same way with Latin America, they're becoming more and more secular minded and less religion. And we have a difficult time understanding people whose religious fanaticism actually equals what they had in the 7th century when Mohammed was alive, the 6th and 7th century. Extreme, strong religious views, so strong that they're willing to die for them and to kill others for them. All right. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but generally, when I had a student last semester, last fall, sat right up front, he asked, well, how many of you have read the Quran? Assuming none of us had. One student raised his hand and said, I've read it. And I had a student this morning who raised her hand and said she had read it. I have not, but I have been told, read excerpts from what other people who have read it have said about it. Did Mohammed actually call for killing persons who don't believe? Your book tries to downplay it. And in one place, Mohammed actually contradicted himself. Early in his ministry, early in his career, he said, win people by persuasion. Love them into line, and they'll follow. Then he realized that does not always work. It worked with some people, not everybody, and he realized he had to convert everybody. So he wound up toward the end of his life saying, kill the infidel. Don't hesitate to kill your neighbors. Kill the unbeliever, kill the backslider, that is, persons who leave Islam. And he advocated strongly spreading his religion by fire and sword, which was the way he converted the people of Mecca, and which was the way that his followers converted the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. Fire and sword. All right, I'll pause here if any of you have any comments, questions. Most of you appear to be fairly attentive, and again, I can understand why. This is an extremely pertinent topic. All right. Now, Muhammad never really spelled out clearly who his successor should be. It's almost like he never planned to die. I mean, and most of us don't. We all rationally know that we're going to someday, but we all think we have a lot of time. And, he did not plan out who would take his place. And this eventually, quickly led to a split between the Sunni and Shiite. The one group believed that only the members of Muhammad's family, his successors, his children, should be successor. Another group said no, that Muhammad actually wanted his nephew to be his successor. Now, when he died, Abu Bakr, his uncle, took over. His first wife's father, took over for a while when he died. But Abu Bakr only lived a couple of years. Then after that, there was a split between who should take over. Now, this split goes all the way to the present time. There's the Sunnis, which are generally more moderate and which make up at least 75% of the Muslims are Sunni. And then there's the more extreme Shiite. The two groups hate each other with a passion and have been at war for 1,400 years with no end to the war in sight. Folks, I believe I asked this question on the final exam. Islam might very well have conquered the whole world. They caught the world unprepared and unready for it. But they had a couple of problems. And their big problem, though, was they started fighting among themselves. And when I said that this morning, someone who had a cell phone said, hey, there's just been an attack made in Tunisia. That I got from the class, so about a big attack made in Tunisia where a bunch of terrorists killed a bunch of foreign visitors. And that's sad because Tunisia depends heavily on tourists. But anyway, right now, I'm talking about 2015. Tunisia is fighting Tunisia. Libya is fighting Libya still. Syria is fighting Syria really hard. I mean, really hard. Iraq is fighting Iraq. Yemen is fighting Yemen. And this is what they have been doing to each other for 1,400 years. If they could stop fighting among themselves, who knows what they could accomplish. But that's one of those what ifs, might have beens. They have another problem. The type of fighting they have done well at is the fighting they would do in the desert, where they get on their horseback, mounted cavalry, raise their swords, and start attacking enemy. Well, this works. In other words, if you notice, the places they have conquered are mostly deserts. When they start running into places that have a lot of brush, bushes, and trees, they don't do well. They did take over the southern part of Spain for a while, and they controlled Sicily for a while. And for a while, they made inroads into the Balkan region, but they never got far. When they went to India, they got Pakistan and still have it. But then they went into a part of India that's more fertile, and they just simply do not fight very well. Virginia, where there's a lot of trees, a lot of brush, a lot of places where the enemy can hide. And again, their type of fighting would never work in the jungles of Vietnam. I mean, not to weaken the Vietnamese there either. But they just simply cannot do well in that fighting where there's a whole lot of trees and underbrush. They only fight well in the open desert. They began to call their leaders caliphs. Now, I had a student this morning correct me that the word caliph is spelled with a K. It might be. Your book still spells it with a C. C-A-L-I-P-H. This is the word they use, similar to our word for king. You know, it's more than chief of a tribe. The caliphs are usually higher up. Now, as I've mentioned, Muhammad made no provision for a successor, and a lot of your caliphs have made the same mistake. Your caliphs would tend to keep their family in a place called a harem, and in spite of Islam's provision against having more than 4 wives, a lot of times these caliphs would have up to 100 or more wives, scores of wives, and they would have several children with these wives. And once the caliph died, these wives would start getting with their sons and making alliances with their generals, whatever, fighting with each other, to the women would make sure their sons would be the next successor. And whoever was still alive after all the killing was over with, he was the one who would wind up taking over. Oftentimes, and this is still true among them, the death of the leader meant a big political turmoil until finally somebody took charge and things would come back to order again. All right. Muslims, as I mentioned, they don't believe in drinking, don't believe in games of chance. There was no rolling of dice, no playing of cards. And with all due respect, sometimes these things are addictive. Sometimes card playing will take control of a person where it can't do anything else. And rolling dice, I mean, that can become addictive also. Now, Muhammad himself never came across tobacco, so therefore the Quran contains nothing against smoking tobacco. But a lot of imams or religious leaders since then have issued prohibitions against tobacco use. I want to say this, folks, and I think I've said this before. My personal note is these issues are better off if left up to each individual to decide rather than being decided by the state. Now again, no Muslim is any harder against tobacco use than I am. And I don't want to sound like I'm bragging on my own morality, but no Muslim is any harder against drunkenness than I am. And no Muslim is any harder against adultery than I am, or against pornography than I am. But the difference between me and them is I believe these issues are better off if left to the individual and not left to the state to try to enforce. I asked the class one time, if you decide to drink and you develop a problem with drinking, whose fault is that? Most of the class agreed it was the fault of the person who took the drink because the law allows you to, and it doesn't compel you to. But one person, a Muslim young man, said it's the fault of the state that allowed it. The state should have stopped you from drinking in the first place. I could not agree with him less. You have the freedom of choice to make a choice whether you do or don't. But again, by them trying to control these things, they've set up a society that's very stagnant and very uncreative. Now, I want to go into two things that they actually been. Actually, if you could go back to the year 1000, you'd find their culture was far, far ahead of European culture. It was said in more than one history book I've read that the Muslims taught Europeans so much, and yet the Muslims learned so little from Europeans. All right, but now let's say here's a math problem. Anybody know how I did that? I faked it. The fact is, folks, you cannot do sums with Roman numerals. I'll fake another one for you. Again, it's all fake. What we are using for our number system is Arabic numerals. They're called Arabic numerals because they were made by the Arabs. The biggest contribution the Arabs gave us is the number 0, which Europeans did not think of as a number at one point. But then we realized 0 is not only a number, it's a very unique number, and it's the only number where you multiply it by that number, you always get the same answer. Any number you multiply by 0 is still 0. It has some other unique properties also, but it's the central point of all numbers. From the number 0, numbers go in two directions. This way and this way, positive and negative. Most of you probably learned this in your math classes. Very important number. At one time, when an emperor wanted to divide loot among his troops, he called his most devout team of mathematicians, and they would work through it late in the night trying to figure out how could we pay each man equally. Today, thanks to Roman numerals, we can do long division, teach it to 9-year-olds. 9-year-olds can do long division. 10-year-olds can even do longer division. The 0, their other invention was algebra. Very important. Because, but once you get past basic arithmetic, you have to start off with algebra in order to learn trigonometry, geometry, and calculus. All the other advanced forms of mathematics you have to learn. You have to learn algebra before you can work the problems that they're involved. Again, with algebra, we can figure out how many winds the electric motor should have in it to work. These are really complex formulas, but they can be figured out algebraically. If you want to get an electric motor that has half a horsepower, how big should the motor be? How many turns should it have? How thick should the diameter of the wire be? All this can be computed in advance. Without algebra, we would not have our automobiles, our airplanes, and a lot of the other electronic gadgets we have. We take for granted these things, but we owe the Arabs a little bit of a debt of gratitude. The Arabs also led the world in fields of medicine and astronomy. Their medicine was at one time far superior to anybody else's. Astronomy, the Arabs have been called the last of the world's great ancient astronomers. They led the way in astronomy until the invention of the telescope. But the Arab world stopped learning right around the year 1000. And that's a shame because Muhammad actually had invited them to study your science, learn your science, make inventions. But they stopped because, and this almost stopped Christians also, but it did stop the Chinese. Science seemed to conflict with their theology. Now, I taught a Friday class here a couple of years ago. It was about 3 years ago. And a student got me after class, and he and I had about an hour and a half long talk. I had plenty of time because it was Friday and I didn't have to hurry home. But he was all upset at the way that Europeans had almost stopped the development of science by opposing men like Copernicus and Galileo. And opposed science. I said, okay, now, if you compare Europe to what it should have been, Europe comes up short. But it said, compare Europe to the Islamic world, the Chinese. In the case of China, and no offense to those of you who might be Chinese, but this is standard history, Chinese philosophers stopped the Chinese advance in science and technology. In the case of Arabs, Arab theologians, Muslims stopped scientific knowledge. In the case of Europe, some Europeans the church tried to oppose, but did not stop. Science marched on. That's a huge difference for them. Science marched on in spite of the church's attempts to stop. You don't find that true of any place else in the world. Again, visit the year 1000, and it's a toss-up. Who is the most advanced people culturally? It's a toss-up between Islam and China. Both were advanced. Next behind Islam and China would have probably been India. Then in fourth place would have been these Central American Indian tribes. Well, they were pretty advanced. Europeans, and I'm saying this being of European descent, in the year 1000, uncouth, dirty, mostly illiterate, with art that was shoddy, architecture that was crumbly and shabby. Fast forward 1,000 years later, which group of people advanced the farthest? They came from behind, Philip. I mean, talking about Europeans, came from behind. And again, a lot of it has to do with theology. More than we Westerners tend to realize. Theology, the bad kind, will slow you down or stop you, or it can propel you higher up depending on how you use it. But again, they were ahead, the Islamic people. And they began to make inroads in desert regions, conquering all of North Africa, and they penetrated pretty deep into the jungles, went to India. Now, I've had more than one Indian student in my class, I'm talking Indian, who has said that they converted the people of Pakistan at sword point, fired sword. I'm not going to question it. Your book, your authors will say that this was possibly done on occasion. Actually, it was. You can't make a blanket statement because you're talking about places that are hundreds of thousands of miles apart and years that are hundreds of years apart. At times, they did convert by fire and sword, and at times they didn't. At times, they let the people, native people, have their own culture and were open and tolerant. At times, they were very, very intolerant. Winston Churchill summed it up. He happened to visit an Islamic country between the wars, and he came back saying these people are such peaceful people and great, and there's a lot that we Westerners might could copy from Islam. Then he studied a little bit farther and modified his statement somewhat, said that Islam has a very, very, very dark side to it. All right. Anyway, the Arabs spread out, conquering. When they left Arabia, they found the Byzantine Empire and the Persian empires, who had been warring for 600 years, were both weakened. What finally happened, the Byzantines got really tough with the Persians and mounted several campaigns that crushed the Persian Empire. Turned out to be a big mistake because once the Persian Empire was crushed, it was just right for the Islamic people to pour out of the Arabian desert, and they met very little resistance. They quickly conquered Egypt and then rushed in and conquered all of North Africa. But for hundreds of years, they were stopped by the Byzantine Empire, partly because the Byzantines had a weapon called Greek fire. Now, this Greek fire was a secret that was in the possession of some Byzantine initiates, and only a few, very few people knew the secret. And today, I've been told we don't know the secret. Most of us believe it had to do something to do with sulfur and tar, but we don't know what chemicals they might have mixed. But the reports are that once the Greek fire was put on a ship, notice what the Byzantines would do to the Arab ships. they would light a little boat and then find a way to guide this boat or use long poles to send this boat loaded with Greek fire against a Muslim ship. And once this Muslim ship was touched by Greek fire, there was no putting it out, no stopping it. It was said that fire would continue to burn. Even they could see it burning even as the ship went down. If Greek fire touched a person, again, that person could not put it out no matter how much he tried to roll over and extinguish it. The person who it touched was going to die, and nothing would put it out. Eventually, of course, probably the big, vast ocean, obviously the big, vast ocean would extinguish the fire, but not until it had burned for a while. As it was said, it would even burn underwater. And at one point, it's believed that one Muslim even knew the secret, but it did not seem to benefit the Muslim world that much. But the Byzantines used Greek fire for hundreds of years against their Muslim adversaries and somewhat kept them at bay. Now, your book goes on to describe two empires, the Umayyad Empire and the Abbasid. They are important folk, but I'll promise you I'm not asking them on the test. These empires, well, first the Umayyads came along, and then the Abbasids came after them and overthrew the last Umayyad dynasty and set up their own empire. Eventually, Islam splintered, fragmented. What I did not mention until now is that the Arab people were Semitic, which means they were related to the Jews who also were Semitic, and yet they hate the Jews and have, some people say the conflict goes all the way back to the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael, two of Abraham's sons, that Isaac got the inheritance and Ishmael was sent away. Others say it goes all the way back even later to the conflict between Jacob and Esau, where the Jacob swindled his brother out of the inheritance, and Esau wound up leaving the territory, and Jacob went on to become the nation of Israel. Be that as it may, they have hated each other. Also, the Arabs look on any land that they ever have conquered is still theirs. Well, the Spanish drove them out. Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492 finished the job, and that's when Isabella felt free to give Columbus his 3 ships. But that's jumping ahead around sort of. But anyway, the Spanish drove them out, but to this day, Islam has a grudge against Spain that we're going to get it back. Sicily, with help from Europe, drove them out also. Then the Balkan region, with help from France and a lot of other European countries, drove out. Here's what happened in the long run, folks. The Muslims were making inroads into Europe. In 1580, a Muslim caliph got to the city of Vienna, here in Austria. I mean, if you're looking about Vienna, is way deep in Austria and getting close to Italy and Germany, and I mean, they got pretty deep. But European armies got together, several nations, and they drove them out of Vienna. Then in 1680, just 335 years ago, that might seem like a long time, in 1680, they went again. Again, the European nations got together, or several of them, including Poland and several German states and Romania. They got together, and they drove the Muslims out of Vienna, away from Vienna. Then the European world invented better technology. They invented better ways of making steel, better ways of making cloth. They invented better rifles. Eventually they invented the steam engine, then the automobile, the airplane, while these people remained behind. Make a long story short, I'm going to jump ahead. Most every Muslim country was conquered by a European country at one time or another. France got Algeria. Italy got Libya. That's why these countries have the same color on the map. Great Britain wound up with Egypt. France and Great Britain shared Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and Palestine. A lot of you, Great Britain also got the Sudan here. France got Chad. This territory here on the old maps. When I was a kid, used to call this French West Africa. The French controlled it. Almost all your Muslim countries were conquered. Then came World War II, and Europeans began to look on conquest as being something evil, so they gave up these colonies. But not until they had proven that the West had better technology and therefore better armies. Then in recent years, well, in 1905, oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia. That might not have seemed so big then, but Westerners went in to drill for the oil, Western entrepreneurs. They went into other Middle Eastern countries. These Middle Eastern countries then took the oil wells from the entrepreneurs who had developed them, just came in and said, this is our land, our territory, it's our oil, we have it. And that is why Western entrepreneurs do not want to invest in this part of the world today. I mean, Far Eastern folk don't do that. The Japanese don't, the Koreans don't, the people of Singapore don't do that, but the Arabs did. They took over the oil wells, and some became super rich as a result of trading in oil. And that's when they began to try to assert themselves. They did not have the means to build weapons, but they acquired weapons, and guess what, folks? The United States has been their biggest supplier. And on Fox News on the way in here this morning, I heard that there are tons of weapons that are missing from Yemen that is believed to have fallen into the hands of Al-Qaeda. They are American weapons that we left behind when we decided there's too much turmoil in Yemen, let's get our people out. And the Marines were told to drop their rifles, and they did. They just gave up everything. And these weapons probably found in the hands of Al-Qaeda. This is something I heard on the news just this morning. Most of you might not have heard it. It might not be on the news again, but they got their weapons mostly from the United States. And now they're using them to fight against us. All right, that's the 21st century. Back to the time we're talking about. Eventually, a group of people came from Mongolia. Now, I've mentioned already how that wave after wave of persons have come from Mongolia. Mongolia was a lot like Arabia, except Mongolia's climate has winters and Arabia does not. Not really. Not a lot of snow, at least in the lower latitudes. But the Mongolians fought like the Arabs. I mean, I already talked about the Huns. The Huns came from here, and then the Bulgars, the Magyars. But there came the Turks. And finally, the Mongolians, people call them under Genghis Khan, came out. The Turks and the Mongolians would have destroyed Islam, except for one thing. They wound up converting to it themselves. But they came and they defeated and they just devastated and crushed Islamic armies, because again, they were fighting Islam on its own terms with mounted cavalry, except they could do it even better than Islam did. They would have, the Mongolians would have, like I stopped Islam completely, would have wiped them off the face of the earth, except, and this is true of a lot of conquerors, they'll sometimes take up the religion of people they conquered. Somehow the Mongolians found the Islamic religion to be fascinating to them, so they took over, they became converted, and the Turks set up the nation we call Turkey. And the Mongolians wound up going back home, for a lot of them anyway. All right. In your book, this takes us up to the Crusades.
So, in Mongolia, are they more Islamic?
No, the Mongolians themselves are not.
Are they Buddhist?
The ones who came across here, I have to be honest with you, I think they're mostly Confucian. I don't know for sure what they're Confucian or Taoist, much like the Chinese, is what I would believe. If any of you know any differently, you're welcome to say so. Islam made some headway, particularly here. In fact, Indonesia is now an Islamic country. Islam did make headway down here in Indonesia and tried to make headway here in Southeast Asia. Islam did not make much headway, significant headway in China, partly because the Chinese have a history of rejecting foreign religions, including Christianity. But then in 1949, they embraced communism, which I would call a foreign religion. But the Mongolians, I believe, are mostly Confucian or maybe a lot Buddhist, but Islam has not made a lot of headway in this region. But when the ones who came out here, particularly the Turks, and conquered this region here, they converted. But they did not go back and convert their people in their homeland, or their original starting point. Again, Islam seems to be more, have the mindset that's more in tune with the desert. And some people have suggested it's a product of the desert. Again, Mongolian people are like, similar to desert, except Mongolia is not a hot, dry desert like Arabia. It's a colder, much colder place. And they do have snowfalls occasionally, and they have some rainfall. But Mongolia is borderline. You wouldn't call it that, but it's almost on borderline. All right. Now the Crusades. The Crusades were to last about 200 years. And folk, I have to put it this way, the Arabs to this day hold it against the Christians for having the Crusades, but here's what was happening. Europe had been under attack on both sides, from this side and from this, by the Muslims. And the Crusades were simply where Europeans decided to pick up the fight and take the fight into their territory. And I can't see anything wrong with it. It was just Europe took the offensive. Now, militarily, the Crusades were a failure. The Crusades lasted from 1095 to 1290. There were some 200 events we might recall Crusades, of which there were 9 million. We're going to talk more about the Crusades when we come to the chapter on the chapter 13. Anyway, the first crusade was a military success, but after that, the Europeans could not quite defeat Islam and could not stop Islam. And Islam remained on. But in 1290, the crusading zeal got stopped on both sides, particularly because of the event that occurred in the Northern Hemisphere. In the year 1307, 17 years after the last crusade, the Black Death hit Europe. I had a pupil explain what was the Black Death. I assumed all of you knew. The Black Death was like our Ebola plague, except they didn't have any means to fight it. It was a terrible plague that came and hit Europe and all of the Northern Hemisphere and carried off at least 1/3 of Europe's population, destroyed whole villages, some of which have not been rebuilt to this day, wiped out whole towns, and it stopped Europe fairly well cold in its tracks from going abroad, and it stopped Islam also from fighting. It was an event that at least temporarily ended the crusade. Yes?
I got a question. It's not really related, but I was just thinking about it. Like in both biblical stories, in the Quran and in the Bible, they both mention Gabriel.
Yes. They both have some passages that are in common. The Bible, though, was written by at least 66 men over hundreds of years. The Quran was written over a period of one generation, possibly by only one man. There is, therefore, some difference. Anyway, like I said, the Black Death did a lot to stop the crusading zeal. Then, of course, go fast forward hundreds of years, the Europeans developed technology that simply put the Arabs to shame. Again, I want to introduce you to the Crusades now because we will talk about them again and go into some more detail than we do now. Then after the Crusades came the Mongolians under Genghis Khan, and they did a lot to hold Islam in check, the Mongolians also. Like I said, the Mongolians would have wiped them out, except that they converted. I'm going to back up a little bit. I forgot to mention, when the Muslims conquered part of Spain, and never got it all, they began to make inroads into France, and a Frenchman named Charles Martel was he was like the prime minister. He was not the king of France, but he was like France's prime minister. Charles Martel led an army that stopped the Muslims at the Battle of Tours. Now, this book I make mention of from time to time, entitled The 10 Most Decisive Battles of the World, mentions the Battle of Tours as one of the most decisive because, according to the authors, the Muslims, had they not been stopped at Tours, might have conquered all of France and then might have conquered all of Europe. Now, as long ago as 1971, I had a very pro-area professor at the University of Tennessee, Dr. Harold Fink by name. He's long deceased now. But he had us read a book, a textbook, where the author said, if Islam had conquered the world, would it have been so bad? I don't know why he would say that, but again, these people had such a high opinion of the Arabs and the authors that this professor wanted us to read. Personally, I think if Islam conquered the world, none of us would have ridden an automobile this morning because the automobile would not exist. Neither would the telephone, neither would the telegraph, neither would the airplane. I don't think any of these things would exist if they had conquered the world.
Are you saying that because they were so strict on what people could do and not do?
That you hit it right on the head. Creativity is something only free people have. The word Islam, the word Islam means submission. In other words, everybody must submit themselves to the person higher. The children must submit themselves to the father. The wife is property of the husband. Submission. And even the younger brothers must obey the older brother. And this is something that's an issue right now in March 18th, 2015. There's a trial going on in New England involving a younger brother who said, I acted on orders of my older brother who told me to do what I did. Most of you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Boston bombing. The older brother was killed and he was partly by police bullets and partly because he was run over by the younger brother who stole the car and tried to get away and ran over his older brother. But he said, my older brother told me to, and my religion I have to follow because my older brother. But the whole thing is submission. You must submit to authority. These type of people, folk, do not, and I say this as respectfully as I can, do not invent or create anything. To invent, you must be free to experiment, to be wrong, to experiment some more, to be wrong some more, and to keep trying. Without freedom, there is no progress. And I had a student, a few years back in another college, said, I don't see the connection between allowing people to drink. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't touch yourself, but allowing people to drink and technological progress. But one of the classmates spoke up, and it was better than he said to me, when you restrict drinking, you will wind up restricting everything else. When the Montgolfier brothers invented the balloon, they were starting to take the balloon up. The King of France came up, and the King of France, Louis XVI, the name, was about to stop it. You know, it was one of the greatest inventions we had been up to that time, but he finally became convinced to allow it to fly. And Montgolfier, at first, because the king wouldn't allow him to send humans, send up pigs and sheep and a chicken or something like that. And they flew, then they came back, then the Montgolfier brothers themselves went up. The king was so impressed, who knows, I might fly him myself. He never did. But the feeling that you have to restrict somebody from trying something new. Remind me of a story I've heard about a certain species of South American crab. If you put one crab in a basket, he'll crawl out. Put a dozen crabs in a basket, none of them get out. When one starts to get out, the other ones will pull it down. And they spend all their whole time in a basket, knowing they're about to be eaten, but they struggle to get out. But they also, trying to get out, they pull each other down and keep each other from getting out. There are several morals to that lesson, folks. And basically, this is what I see these people are doing. Now, something else. They're women. The Islamic men are terrified that their women will develop non-Islamic traditions and customs. And here's what they're afraid of. It is known that religion is spread from one generation to the next, mostly more by the women than the men. The men are busy with their careers, whatever. The women give their children religious instructions. When they lose their women folk, they've simply lost their religion. It's that simple. as Muslim women begin to go out in the rest of the world and see Western women driving cars, having careers, having jobs, having their own money, owning their own property, setting up their own businesses. A lot of Muslim women say, we want to copy this, we want this also. If they can do it, why can't we? And this terrifies the men. If they are allowed to do this, we'll lose them. They're afraid that if their wives get turned loose in at least a little bit, their wives will step out. And I'll say this, being married, having been married for 25 years. Married couples have to trust each other. It's simply, there's no way around it, especially in the modern world. I mean, I'm here, my wife is there, and I'm not the least bit worried that she is going to be unfaithful to me while I'm away. She doesn't have to worry about me either. But these people, I'm talking about these men, are just terrified that someone will take their life from them while they're gone. So they felt they have to keep her under wraps, keep her behind a veil, keep her completely covered. And they're very upset at Westerners because we, more and more, see, our movies are finding their way into their countries. And they depict a lot of illicit sex and a lot of adultery, which the Islamic people do find offensive. Quite frankly, I find a lot of offensive too, but my take on that is, I don't have to look at it. Let them show it. If I don't like it, I can turn it off. And I often do. Believe me, I do. I don't watch hardly any TV. Haven't been to a movie in months. I mean, because I don't have time for that stuff. Big waste of time, really. But the Muslims are terrified that Western ideas are going to encroach on their way of thinking, and every religion is run into this in the modern world. Every religion is coming to conflict. Hinduism that taught that there should be an outcast group of people who should, and this comes into conflict with the rest of the world, and also it's okay to marry 9-year-old girls. I mean, this has been condemned by the rest of the world. Christianity has conflict with its and science and Christianity doesn't seem to get along very well together. Big conflict. And also Christian teachings are coming under a lot of fire and a lot of question. Same with Islam. And they are terrified that our ideas are penetrating their minds, and it's going to make it will make a difference because some of the people there will adopt non-Islamic ways, and that's one reason why they come after us and hate us so badly. They're afraid that we're going to encroach upon them.
Yeah, but are they gonna lighten up, or are they just gonna stay set in their ways? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I believe me, I know what you mean. The only best answer I can give is they're not going to lighten up anytime soon. I mean, I had a student ask me, how long has this war been going on? I had to answer, 1,400 years. Now, I want to say this. The Confederacy fought well during the Civil War, but when the Confederacy saw they were beaten, they quit fighting. Japan, they fought hard and they fought fanatically during the World War II. But when their emperor told them that the war was over, they all stopped fighting. But with this group, they'll never stop fighting. As long as, somebody said, when they're licked, they'll quit fighting. No. As long as they're alive, they're going to keep coming. And there's no stopping. It's been gone 1,400 years, and there's no stopping it. They won't quit. And there's no one man. Now, speaking of one man, then I'll close. They have a story that there were 12 imams. The first 11, we have their names and know when they were born and when they died. Then comes the 12th. These were the leaders. The 12th imam, we now believe he existed, but he disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. Supposedly he was taken away by Allah and hidden away. And at the end of time, he's going to come back and unite all of Islam, and then Islam will conquer the world. You might hear this about the 12th imam. This is not in the book, but I thought I'd mention it. From time to time, you hear a story about that this man might be the 12th imam or the 12th imam. Any of you heard what I'm talking about? Anything about it? None of you have? Okay, you've heard it now. We might hear it again before a few days are out. But the 12th imam is going to come out, and he's going to restore. Now, I'm going to devote 2 days to Islam. In years past, I didn't, but starting a couple semesters ago, I felt like Islam is so important. So we're going to take up from where we left it off and talk about it again on Monday. Everybody have a good weekend.